We're going to kick off the meeting with Pat Davis, who's the director of the Vehicle Technologies Office. And Pat has been our leader in this office since 2008. He's had 35 years in his government career, and he's a great leader and very much champion of the Clean Cities program here at DOE. So with that, Pat, I'd like you to kick things off. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda, and thanks for pointing out that I'm an old guy, with 35 years. Thank you so much for being here. It really does mean the world to us that you would take time out of your busy schedules to be with us today, and more importantly, to give us a full day of your insight and expertise. And also thank you for being here in beautiful February. March, April, May, they're overrated. Cherry blossoms are overrated. We'll send you a postcard, but thanks for being with us there in the heart of the winter. Your input really is what this day is all about, and matter of fact, my main message to you today is that we've asked you here because your input is so important, and that because your input will really will form the primary influence in shaping our planning for the next 5 years and in shaping our deployment efforts and our strategy document. So we take that very much to heart and appreciate your help. And we need your help because I think more than anyone, you understand that deployment is difficult. It's hard. Matter of fact, it can make R&D look kind of easy. We can develop great technology, and we do in the Vehicle Technologies Office, and we can even lower the cost of that technology, but the market doesn't necessarily respond to that. Consumers might not necessarily care, fleet owners may not necessarily respond. We are focused on national drivers such as energy security, petroleum dependency, carbon mitigation, climate change, and these don't always map to the very near-term pressures and decisions that consumers and fleet owners have to make as they make their vehicle purchase decisions. And we also want to recognize that the market has momentum. The market can be a comfortable place with the status quo. We have a very well-developed infrastructure and capitalized infrastructure for both the manufacture of vehicles and the fuels and distribution of those vehicles. And the market can be comfortable with that. So we get it that deployment is hard. It's very hard. And making transition from the status quo can be difficult. But transitioning to a sustainable transportation system is essential if we're going to address those key drivers, that energy security, petroleum dependency, if we're going to address the economic cost of oil's price volatility and avoid climate change worst consequences. So from the $116 billion in gross domestic product lost from oil price shocks to $100 billion in climate and weather disasters in 2012, our reliance on oil does rack up a heavy cost. Current low oil prices may make it appear as if we're saving money, but it does mask the true cost of petroleum. And I don't think any of us here believe that $2 a gallon or $2.50 a gallon or even $3 a gallon really represents the true cost of gasoline, for example. And so we hope you at least, and the Department of Energy are committed to reducing our petroleum dependency and addressing climate change. There is good news, good news along the way. Stronger fuel economy standards will double the efficiency of our cars and trucks by 2025 and eliminate the use of 2.2 million barrels of oil per day and about 6 billion metric tons of carbon pollution overall. And the Vehicle Technologies Program will continue our good work in developing technologies and lightweighting, fuels, combustion, electric drive batteries, electric drive components, et cetera, to help keep fueling innovations for the marketplace and to do so going forward. And the Clean Cities program is an indispensable part of these efforts. With more than 6.4 billion gallons of petroleum saved, 1 billion of it in 2013 alone, Clean Cities really is helping us move the needle. And more importantly, I think Clean Cities has a national reach, but also a local focus that really helps bring the unprecedented expertise of DOE's national laboratories and technologies to those who really need it most, vehicle buyers and drivers. And I think perhaps more importantly, Clean Cities coordinators are experts at connecting together the right people at the right time, and we thank you for your great work. So whether we're talking about natural gas or propane, plug-in electric vehicles, biofuels, fuel economy, or even idle reduction, Clean Cities really can help fleets choose the petroleum reduction solution that best fits their needs. And as I said, we can't continue that good work and can't continue to refine our approach without meetings like this one and input from you. You know the market's needs, you know the market's opportunities, from the most promising ones to the largest barriers. And that's why we've invited you here today to help provide feedback on our Clean Cities next 5-year strategy. Having that strategy will help guide our future efforts. It'll help guide them in a coordinated way and help also ensure that we spend those precious taxpayer dollars as efficiently and effectively as we possibly can. So I really do look forward to hearing your ideas and seeing those ideas form a new strategy for Clean Cities. And I don't want to keep us too long and let you get to your good work, but I do want to finally conclude with letting you know what a great group of Clean Cities champions you have here at the Department of Energy. Dennis Smith, Linda Bluestein, Shannon Shea, and Mark Smith, and the whole Clean Cities team. They are passionate about what they do. They fight for this cause every day. Sometimes they fight me a little bit, but they are really dedicated. So help me thank them for their work. So once again, thanks for being here. We're really looking forward to your input and appreciate more than you know the time that you've dedicated to being with us here today. Thanks.
Thanks, Pat. Most of you know me, but I'm Dennis Smith. I'm the National Clean Cities Director. And as Pat was saying, we're very much in listening mode today. So I know normally when we get together in the large groups, you're looking to Linda or to me to kick off new programs or explain how things work or new tools or whatever. Well, we're going to be very quiet today and be listening very closely to what you have to say, because that's so important that we get this input from you. You know, we're really constantly updating our strategies to reflect what's going on in the marketplace and really the tools that are available to us. I mean, I was thinking as I was preparing for this, 20 years ago, or a little over 20 years when we started Clean Cities in 1993, we didn't have cell phones, internet, email. We didn't even have hybrid vehicles back then. So a lot has changed, and that's why we want to get together at least every 5 years or so to have you help us think about our strategy so that we can always be responsive to the needs, and really what are the tools and the levers that we have to push out there that are going to be helpful to you. And really even 5 years ago at our last meeting, I mean, things like social media were still finding their legs and determining was it going to have any impact at all, or was it just something that teenagers were playing with or something out there. So all of that changes rapidly, and so that's why we need to continue to meet like this, and I assure you we're going to pay attention to what you have to tell us that you think will be effective, that we need to keep our eyes on out there. You know, Clean Cities has always had this dual strategy when you think about it, because a lot of our tools and websites and all of those things are really to impact the masses on a national strategy, but then we work so closely with our Clean Cities coalitions to engage locally in the communities and the states and the regions. So with the strategies and the suggestions that we hope to get from you today, please, anything along those lines that you feel may work in one area or another, we're interested in all good ideas that are going to help us either on the national or on the local or all together with that. So there's no silly ideas or whatever. We want to hear from you as we're going through the different sessions today. But we do ask that you concentrate your ideas on things that we can have a meaningful impact and where we've got an influence in things that are within our scope and our budget. You're in Washington. I know it's tempting to tell us everything you'd like to fix or solve about Washington, but that's not always things that the Clean Cities program can do for you. So some of those suggestions may be better discussed at lunch than in the sessions, but please try to help us focus on those things. And speaking of budget, let me point out that, you know, our budget for Clean Cities, our core budget, I looked last night, we're coming up on 8 years that it's been pretty darn flat, which in Washington, that's actually good news, that you're not being attacked, that they're taking away from your budget all the time. But that gives us some idea of planning for the future, what our resources are going to be. Thanks to working with our Clean City coalitions and the stakeholders and partners in the room here, we've really been able to stretch those dollars far and do more now than we've ever done before. But that is something we've got to keep our eye on. We don't see another $300 million Recovery Act anytime soon, so we've got to keep those things in mind. And really, our budget being flat is also, I think, a reflection of the budget for the Vehicle Technologies program overall being fairly flat over those years. So I think no matter what political party you're looking at, they feel like this is an important area, and we've been held pretty constant for that period of time. So I think that's my, my input. I'd like Linda to come up and give some opening remarks as well, but thank you so much for being here, and we really are listening to what you have to say.
Hi, and welcome to DOE headquarters. We're gratified that you're here, and I can't thank you enough for participating in the strategic planning meeting. We have, I think, full attendance here today. We have been preparing for this meeting for the last few months and have been anticipating your arrival to gather your input. So guess what? Now you've got a really big job today that we're assigning to you. Your job in the morning is pretty easy, but we want you to pay attention very carefully. You'll get to sit here in the auditorium and listen to our world-class national laboratory experts talk about the deployment status of each major technology in the Clean Cities portfolio. These presentations will cover background information on each of the Clean Cities technologies and share ideas on what market opportunities and niches the authors believe are top priorities. In the afternoon, we're going to do something a bit different. We're going to draw on your expertise and viewpoints to inform us about what needs to get done at the national and local levels to achieve the greatest impact. As our on-the-ground stakeholders, you have a unique perspective on the marketplace and how we can best help fleets and consumers choose the petroleum reduction solutions that meet their needs. And maybe you might disagree with some of the presenters' priorities or have ideas of your own. There are no right and wrong answers here. We want to hear everything, and we want to engage with all of you and encourage you to share. At the end of the sessions, we will evaluate your written and verbal comments and hope to prioritize actions for each technology type. Your collective input will help us put Clean Cities resources to better use and help us understand how to support your technologies for the greatest impact. This input can inform important work at DOE and its laboratories, helping us to better facilitate and prioritize efforts. It can also help DOE understand what coalitions need to be better equipped for new realities at the local level. Now, due to the interest in our strategic planning effort and the commensurate sizes of the breakout sessions, we've designed a structure that combines verbal input at this afternoon's breakout sessions with brief written statements that you will provide to inform us. Marcy Rood-Warpy with Argonne National Laboratory Center for Transportation Research will come up next and explain the design and layout of the agenda and give you some important information you need to know about today's meeting. So again, we are sincerely appreciative of your active participation, and I will hand things over to Marcy to discuss how you can best participate in today's session, so pay close attention. Thank you.
morning, everyone. Again, I'm Marcy Redwarby from Argonne National Laboratory. I have the pleasure of spearheading with Linda this strategic planning process, which has been very interesting, and certainly I think you'll find it to be a good use of your time today. 2020 is an important year for clean cities. As many of you may know, since 2004, the program has been talking about our annual goal of reducing 2.5 billion gallons of petroleum by 2020. While we appear to be on track to meeting that goal, thanks to the great efforts of all of you in this room and who are participating remotely, we still must be thoughtful in our planning process and laser focused and strategic in coming up with the next 5 years worth of program goals and activities. Let's see. So again, the purpose really of this year's effort is to focus in on these key niche markets in each of the fuel and vehicle technology types. We did undertake a similar process 5 years ago. What's different this time is really honing in on those niche markets that we think can help move the needle in our industries. We are basically trying to answer these two questions that are here. Again, what are the target niche markets that we should be focusing on that provide the greatest opportunity, and how should they be accomplished? Peter? I know. It's not moving. Peter? Do that. But I thought I pushed it though. There we go. Nope. Well, I can just go ahead. Okay, so the agenda for today's meeting, again, we're going to start with the 6 plenary presentations by the laboratory experts. We are going to talk about natural gas, of course, and renewable natural gas, in particular focus on food waste and landfill gases. Then we'll go to biofuels, and E85 and biodiesel will be discussed, and then also propane. And then we will break, and we'll go into consumer fuel economy. That will be presented by Oak Ridge, and then plug-in electric and hybrid electric vehicles. And Dan Santini will also be talking some about hybrid electric vehicles, medium duty in particular. And then finally, we'll end with idle reduction. We'll break for lunch, and then we will come back to this main level for 6 facilitated sessions. Natural gas, again, will be held here in the auditorium, biofuels in the small auditorium, which is just across the way, and then consumer fuel economy, which is actually up 1 level. And then we'll have another break and another set of the breakout sessions, plug-in electric vehicles back here, and then propane across the way in the small auditorium, and idle reduction again upstairs. And then we'll all reconvene back here, and you'll hear about some of the key themes from each of the sessions. If you're, I want to stress that we are focusing on EPACT fuels only. We had a limited amount of time today, so we want to focus on areas that really can have areas of significant impact over the next 5 years. We will include in the strategic plan a section covering fuels that are emerging in our transportation markets. So, and then, oh, you got it up. Great. It's magic. Next slide. I swear. This is the advance. There we go. Okay. All right, so again, there's been a series of papers that have been written by the labs, and the presentations will highlight some of those key findings in these papers. They're going to look at the current market status, current activities that Clean Cities is deploying, high-level trends in these markets, and also, again, targeting and drilling down to those key niche markets. We asked them to come up with up to 5 niche markets. Some have maybe 6 or 7. Some have under 5. And we'll also address some of the barriers and challenges that we see facing the market in these particular niche markets, and then talk about activities and strategies. So please, when you get a chance, when you go back to your offices, read our papers that are online at that website. Next slide. Okay, the breakout sessions. We're going to start with identifying the high priority and niche market opportunities. You'll have a worksheet that you'll get when you walk into the room, and it will be pre-populated with the niche markets that the lab folks identified. And there's an area also for your ideas on the niche markets that you think are key. And there'll be a series of questions that'll be asked on that particular worksheet, and then you'll also get the opportunity to rank the overall program or the niche markets. Next slide, I'll show you this. And next slide. Anyway, okay. I don't know. All right, anyway, next slide. If you get it, tell me. So anyway, they'll be pre-populated, and you'll get the ability to look at payoff for the particular fuel, the likelihood of success, and the Clean Cities impact, the ability to have a significant impact on that particular niche market. Then the worksheet 2 is when you'll be given the opportunity to talk about the Clean Cities strategies, broken into partnerships and collaborations, outreach and information sharing, training and technical support. And then we'll ask you to explain the objective in each of those and how we might go about accomplishing those. And then there's a key box that we want all of you to fill out, of course, is the role of the local coalitions in helping to meet that specific niche market. So our facilitators will also go into these instructions at the beginning of the sessions. They're here, I think they're all in the audience now. Fred Hansen from Energetics. We have Diane Russell from the Institute of Conservation Leadership, and Doug Brookman from Public Solutions. Next slide. I don't know. Anyway, the timeline. The timeline for this process, we do have the opportunity for written comments to be submitted by March 13th. You can go to the website, the link that was shown earlier, and we'll be able to, I think that'll be open tomorrow. There's a portal, and you'll be able to submit additional comments, and you can also inform your stakeholders of the opportunity to submit comments as well. We're expecting a meeting report to be posted hopefully within the next 5 to 6 weeks, and the final document hopefully sometime before the end of the fiscal year. And then we'll conclude with a webinar that will be available to all stakeholders to hear about the strategic plan and our outcomes. Okay, next slide. The next slide's about housekeeping. And so first of all, security issues. Please wear your badge at all times, and please be respectful about your cell phones, keep those off. As far as our breaks, there are restrooms all the way down by the burn bag room, and then if you go that way, there's also some restrooms. They're limited stalls, but hopefully everyone will get a chance to use the restroom if they need to. Then we have lunch, and lunch, we have 2 options. You can go to the DOE cafeteria, and you go out here to the left. There's an escalator that you can take. Please take your badge and your photo ID, because you'll need that to get back in. And then also this way, there's the Subway and Dunkin' Donuts. And please leave the cafeteria by 12:15 because we need to start the breakouts on time. So, and then the next slide. This is step, and I'm gonna, because we don't have time for long introductions, I'm just gonna briefly introduce folks. I'll introduce David in a minute. He's gonna talk about oil prices and volatility. Here are my colleagues, Marianne Mintz and Andy Burnham from Argonne, who will talk about natural gas. And also my dear friends at NREL, Wendy Defoe, whom we all love, and Callie Johnson, whom we love most of the time except during the annual reporting cycle. But they'll be talking about E85 and biodiesel. And Margot Melendez will be talking about propane, and that's the first session today. And then next, Bo Salisbury from Oak Ridge National Lab will be talking about the Fuel Economy Guide and other consumer-related activities that could be done in conjunction with the coalitions. And the last was Linda, I think. There's another one. There's Dan. Dan Santini from Argonne will talk about plug-in electric vehicles, and then Linda Gaines, who's our lead technical expert on idle reduction. So I'm going to start, go back to David Green. David Green is now a senior fellow at the University of Tennessee at the Howard Baker Center. He was formerly with Oak Ridge National Laboratory, just retired in 2013, but he really didn't retire, and that's a good thing for all of us. He's recognized by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for contributions to that organization's receipt of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. So I think that's a really wonderful thing. And he's going to talk about the cost of oil dependence on our impact on the economy and our society and the role for alternative fuels. So David.
Okay. Thank you, Marcy. It's always a pleasure for me to be with the Clean Cities folks. More fun than any other meeting I ever go to, so I'm looking forward to it. That's the first time I've ever seen the slides created, actually, as the speaker was going to speak. But I hope this works. If it's possible to raise the slides a little bit, that would be great, because I'm not sure that people in the front can see the bottom. If it's not possible, okay, we'll go on. I think at the end of 2014, there were three things that almost everybody in America knew. One was, what is Ebola? And who is Charlie Hebdo? And that gasoline prices had just crashed. And like it or not, all of our fuels compete with gasoline, and price really matters. So this is important to us. But why did gasoline prices crash? And that's what I'd like to talk about, and what can we expect for the future. So let's see if this works. Advance. No. Could you advance the slide, please?
Just go ahead, just go on.
My wife is a choral director. She once had a student who was an Italian, and when he talked, he always, but if you held his arms at his side, he couldn't speak. And I'm the same way with slides, so I'm going to have to wait. So the first slide, which we will see, I don't know when, shows the cost of a gallon of gasoline divided between the cost of the crude oil to make it and the cost of everything else. That is the retailing, the transportation, the refining, federal tax, state tax, local tax, everything. And you will be amazed when you see this slide, because, and I will be too, because the cost of everything but the crude oil has been $1.10, plus or minus 10 cents, for 40 years. And what causes the price of gasoline to go up and down is the price of crude oil. Now, Seriously. I mean,
In defense, we can see the slide, it's just not coming up.
you see it in your head, right? Okay. The next slide. Well, and I thought you were out to get Marcy, but no, it's just everybody. I'm sorry, but there's short time, so I really have to go on. So the next slide shows the price of crude oil since 2004. And we've had a run-up in the price of crude oil to 2008 to $140 a barrel, and then a crash, which is very much like the crash we saw at the end of 2014, same rate of decline. And after the Great Recession impact in 2009, the price of oil came back up gradually to reach $100 a barrel or so in 2010, 2011, in that period, and stayed there for more than 4 years, stayed at $100 a barrel. And my assertion is that this is something new. This price of oil sticking at $100 a barrel for 4 or 5 years is something we haven't seen before. And it represents a fundamental change in the world oil market, just as the impact of the Arab OPEC oil embargo in 73, 74 signaled a fundamental change in the world oil market. How are we doing, guys? Don't know. Because the next one, I don't think I can explain to you without actually having the slide. I'll give you the background to it. So can we actually see the first slide with the blue and the red? Okay. So this blue, this is everything but the crude oil, and the red is the crude oil, and you can see that the crude oil is the source of the variation. Okay, next please. Will this work? Oh. Okay, and this shows the gradual increase and the peak in 2008, the crash in oil prices with the Great Recession, and then climbing back up to 4 years of hanging around $100 a barrel. Okay? Now, the next one is the explanation why. So this I call connecting the dots. This slide is connecting the dots. And if I may, you see the OPEC market share across the bottom. If you can't see it, this x-axis across the horizontal is the market share of the 11 members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and of course the price of oil on the vertical axis. And this data comes from BP's statistical abstract. I didn't make it up. Prior to the first oil price shock in 1973-74, the price of oil is down around $12 a barrel. At this point, OPEC organized itself in 1961 with the intention of influencing world oil prices. Now, if you don't believe me, Google OPEC, go to their website, click on the menu item that says purpose, and read it for yourself. So they know what they're doing, and they say so. But with this first shock, I think they themselves were surprised how far the oil prices went up, tripled. Oil prices tripled, and stayed there for a little while. Then with the Iran-Iraq war in 1979-80, most of the production from those countries went out, and we had another doubling of world oil prices to about $100 a barrel. But immediately, supply started coming forth from non-OPEC countries, and demand started shrinking around the world in response to this very high price of oil. And if you're OPEC, you have one strategy for maintaining a high price of oil, and that is cutting back production. You cut back production, you reduce supply, and you force up the price. And that's what they did. They made a decision to do that. In 1979, OPEC was producing 30 million barrels a day. They cut back every year to 1985 till they were producing 16 million barrels a day, just a little more than half. Saudi Arabia was producing about 9.6 million barrels a day in 79, down to 3.5 million barrels per day in 1985. And obviously, when you've done that, you realize you can't keep doing this forever. There's no way to go negative. And so they gave up, and so began increasing production slightly. Oil prices collapsed, but not to $12 a barrel, but instead to $25, $30 a barrel. And because they had most of the conventional oil in the world, and the world oil market was growing, they regained market share, and then bang, back we are again with another rise in oil prices, starting in 2004 and going on. Now, in the recent increase, we've gone to $100 a barrel again, 2010, 2011, 2012, even 2008 is up there. But you don't see any reduction in OPEC market share. So they're able to keep the price at $100 a barrel without cutting production. And they not only didn't lose market share, they actually increased output by 2 million barrels a day during that period. So here's OPEC producing the same amount, but the price of oil is staying at 100. And the only way that could happen is if the world supply and demand are less responsive to price than they were before. And that's why I say we're in a different regime. Fundamental change in the world oil market. Okay, next please. So, what should we expect for the future? Well, we should not expect prices to stay low or stay high or stay in the middle. They're not going to be constant. We look at this price path. Since the influence of OPEC on the market, it's been a roller coaster ride. And it's going to continue to be a roller coaster ride. So we shouldn't expect prices to stay high or stay low or stay in the middle, but to go up and down. Final slide, please. So what does this mean for us, I think? It means that when we compare the cost of alternative fuels with petroleum, we should not compare at a constant price. We should compare at a random price that goes up and down. Well, what does that mean? It means that now we're down. We're at $40 to $50 a barrel. By the way, $12, 20 to 30, 40 to 50. So we seem to have a new floor, raising every time. So we should expect prices to vary in the future, but we should also expect them to be a little bit higher, substantially higher than in the past. So that means oil dependence is going to continue to be a problem for the United States. Anyone who thinks the Middle East is more secure today than it was in 1973, 74 has obviously not been paying attention. And substituting other sources for petroleum is still going to reduce our oil dependence costs, and reducing petroleum use is obviously going to continue to be an important strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So this is maybe a little contrary to what you've heard about the oil shale revolution and the tight oil revolution. That matters a lot. It's important to the United States. It has greatly reduced our oil imports. Nonetheless, we're still going to have volatile and high oil prices in the future, and oil dependence is going to continue to be a very serious problem for our country. And so that's where you guys come in. And thank you very much. Do you have time for questions?
No, I think we're going to table it until after that.
Fine. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them one-on-one.
We'll also have, perhaps we'll have some time at the end for some sessions after the lab speakers.
Are we done?
Yeah. Yeah, natural gas. Hi, my name is Andy Burnham. I'm from Argonne National Lab, and I'll be speaking with Marianne Mintz on natural gas. I'm very glad I didn't prepare any slides because I'm off the hook, thank God. So if we do get slides going, I'll scroll through them, and here we go. So kicking off really quickly, for natural gas vehicles, they're really an important part of the Clean Cities portfolio. When you look at petroleum displacement numbers calculated by the program, they account for about 60% of the displacement from AFVs. A large portion being compressed natural gas, and then a growing portion being LNG. And that displacement comes from coordinated projects, the Recovery Act, and as well as the National Clean Fleets Partnership. Other things that Clean Cities is doing in the natural gas area is communication products. So one of the key ones being the Alternative Fuels Data Center, which is a warehouse of a lot of great information on all alternative fuels and natural gas specifically. So the work with Motor Week, which is working to kind of highlight success stories of the Clean Cities program, has really been an ongoing successful partnership for more than 10 years, highlighting natural gas projects. Toolkit, so as Marcy was talking about the focus on niche markets, there's been an interest in really looking at specific niches and specific fuels. So we developed a case study on compressed natural gas refuse fleets, and that was kind of one of the test cases to start doing a toolkit, developing a case study, doing presentations, providing other documentation to really dig deep on one specific niche with a fuel. And then partnerships, DOE has worked with the California's South Coast AQMD as well as the California Energy Commission to address technical issues related to natural gas vehicles and infrastructure. Looks like we're, in the next slide, some of the other activities that we're looking at are technical assistance. The Tiger team's looking at really troubleshooting issues related to vehicles and infrastructure. Technical reports, here we see a report that Margaret Smith and John Gonzalez did on the cost of natural gas infrastructure. And then tools, so that's a really big part of the AFDC. There's a lot of great tools touching on kind of the station location, economic, environmental impacts, petroleum use impacts of alternative fuel vehicles and CNG specifically. So getting into the actual market, so we were looking at about 120 to 150,000 natural gas vehicles on the road today. I think NGVA says about 150,000. When you look at on a vehicle basis, a large percentage of that, around 70,000, are light-duty vehicles. But when you look at fuel use, about 80% of, can you go to the next slide? 80% of the fuel use is really on the heavy-duty side. So economics are really driving the push to high fuel use fleets. And so what we've seen in the last, 10 years or so is that the vehicle count for NGVs has been pretty flat. But fuel use has been really, really growing as the focus has been replacing and pushing, heavy-duty vehicles. Some of the key niche markets that, natural gas has a good foothold in are transit buses, obviously, and refuse haulers. For transit buses, 20% of fuel use and about 25% of new sales are natural gas, and there's about 11,000 on the road today. For refuse, there's about 8,000 on the road today, and 50% of new sales are natural gas, which is pretty incredible. And then so future growth, Navigant and other business consultants have been looking at projections, and they do see significant sales increases in the next decade because of the low price of natural gas fuel. Can you go to the next slide? For natural gas infrastructure, there's about 1,500 CNG stations available today, about 100 LNG stations. What we see here is that there's really been significant growth in the last 5 years. A lot of that being due to Recovery Act funding, putting a lot of stations out, and then also obviously private investment in this has really significantly increased the amount of stations available. So kicking into our niche markets, what we did, and we're one of the guys that did too many, but we looked at 5 niche markets for the vehicle side: regional haul, concrete mixers, paratransit and shuttles, school buses, and utility service vehicles. Through this process, we looked at the population of these vehicles, trying to get data on that. What's their average mileage use? What's their fuel use? And then did some calculations to try and do some scenarios to look at the payback period for natural gas vehicles using in these specific niches. Try to understand what the market potential is by doing a couple different scenarios. I'll quickly go through kind of the results of this and then talk very briefly about the niches. Regional haul is the big one. There's about 800,000 vehicles on the road today. We looked at kind of, depending on range, what the average mileage was for different scenarios, and then looked at one specific case, port drayage. And the takeaway is that you can get really, at higher fuel prices, you can get good paybacks on that, and that's why the market has obviously been really pushing this area, and it's really a big one. Concrete mixers are similar to transit buses. They see some fairly good paybacks, and there's around 70,000 vehicles, so it's a good market as well. Paratransit and shuttles, school buses, and utility service, the paybacks get a little bit longer, but there's still some significant market potential, especially school buses, which is really a huge market. And then we also looked at renewable natural gas, which Marianne will talk a little bit about. If you could go to the next slide. So what you can see with renewable natural gas not really being a niche market, but more a fuel. And what we see is that if you can use food waste or landfill gas, you can still get some significant petroleum reduction, but really the benefit is on the greenhouse gas side. RNG is a low carbon fuel, and so as much as you can use it, you're going to get really significant greenhouse gas benefits. Next slide, please. So I'll quickly go through a little bit of details. I kind of talked about this. For regional haul trucks, there's about 800,000 on the road. They can drive 50,000 plus miles a year. The engine availability for these vehicles are the 9 and 12 liter Cummins Westport engines. They typically are using private infrastructure or doing public infrastructure with an anchor fleet. And then really the economics drive the push to these vehicles, and they require 1 to 3 year paybacks to make it make sense to go to natural gas. Go to the next slide. The next one we looked at is concrete mixers. There's about 60 to 80,000 of these trucks. Similar to refuse haulers, they are using kind of time filling, and they're also interested in looking at the economics. That's what's pushing them to this fuel. Go to the next slide. And then paratransit and shuttles, this is a kind of a big group that can range from like medium duty vans to larger class 7 shuttle buses. Their interest is potentially using engines for the OEM conversions of gasoline engines all the way to the Cummins Westport 9 liter. And so the future Cummins Westport 6.7 liter actually fits really well with this niche. And then FTA funding can also provide some incremental funding on that. So there's some opportunities there. School buses are a really big market on the vehicle side. There's almost 700,000 school buses out there. They also range kind of in size from the smaller type A to the larger type D. Where we see school buses being a real good future market is that with the 6.7 liter engine, that will provide an opportunity to fit the type C bus, which is actually the most popular and most purchased bus type out there, and currently there's no product. So that will be a really important advancement for this niche opportunity. And then finally, the next slide is utility service vehicles, another big niche, lots of vehicles, 260,000. There's lots of different, vehicles. You could go from the service vans to aerials and things like that. So there's a wide range. And where we see the potential here is, kind of the natural gas associations that are interested in having, this fuel be used in vehicles, kind of practice what you preach, that they have a lot of vehicles. They're interested in converting their fleet. So there's good opportunities there. I'll throw it to Mary Ann to talk about RNG.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Now, this is a busy slide, I apologize, but basically, if you look at the map, you can see where there are existing landfill gas waste-to-energy projects in the U.S. The blue are the candidate landfills, and the orange are the operational ones. And it's hard to see from here, but there's basically there's 636 landfills that have existing projects, but only 37 of them produce renewable gas, which could be either injected into a natural gas pipeline or used directly as vehicle fuel. And that requires upgrading of the biogas to essentially a pipeline gas quality. On the map, you see the location of the candidate landfills are pretty much all around the country, but they tend to be in the more populated states like California, Texas, Illinois, and actually, most landfills tend to be more in urban areas as well, which is why it's a potential opportunity for clean cities. About 440 candidate landfills are capable of producing a fair amount of natural gas, as Andy showed you earlier on that earlier slide, as a potential market. Another potential market is food waste, the stuff that you throw away in the garbage or that restaurants or food processors also throw away or have to dispose of. And 133 billion pounds, or over 30% of the U.S. food supply, basically goes to waste. So it's a fairly large resource, and it's all over the country. Again, it tends to be more located in urban areas. Renewable natural gas, let's see, only a handful of waste energy are currently produced renewable natural gas, and they utilize some food waste on current projects. Not much, but interest is rising. If you see in the graph on the right, the current landfill projects, you have 37. There are about 10 or so in the future that are under construction, and a few more that are planned. You see interest in food waste is rising as well, and there are about 200 programs around the country where there's curbside collection of food waste from residential locations. And renewable natural gas can be produced alone, or it can be digested in a standalone digester, or it can be added to another digester for wastewater treatment plant or something like that. Next slide, please. Okay, this shows you one of the drivers, the benefits. As I said, there's a lot of supply. There are significant environmental benefits. The graph on the upper left shows you, in general, where you stand in terms of well-to-wheel greenhouse gas reductions. Look specifically at the green lines, and you see, compared to gasoline or natural gas, the green lines there, you have quite a bit of greenhouse gases being emitted, whereas if you go to these CNG produced from landfill gas or wastewater treatment plant, you can go to numbers that are very small or even negative in terms of the well-to-wheel emissions. So it's a very, very good fuel, and as Andy said earlier, you can achieve very large greenhouse gas reductions. It also qualifies under the renewable fuel standard, and projects are now getting what they call renewable identification numbers, which are a big benefit in terms of reducing the cost. And in fact, cellulosic biofuel, almost all of the cellulosic biofuel that's produced in the U.S. today is from renewable natural gas. It also increases the yield of the digester, and as you can see in the graph on the lower left-hand corner, food waste, grease trap grease, which is fats, oils, and greases, or bread, very high biogas potential as compared to some of the other sources. Some of the other, just want to make sure I didn't forget anything. Also, I want to mention that there are bans. Some food waste is now banned from landfills in certain locations. There's also talk of a renewable gas standard in some places like California, which would also be a boost for renewable natural gas. Barriers are cost. These are high capital projects. They're costly. They're much more costly than things like combined heat and power projects or composting, which is why those 200 curbside collection programs in the U.S., all of that food waste goes to composting. It's much cheaper. They're complex projects, they have long lead times, a lot of partners are involved, a lot of approvals. Incentives tend to be temporary and uncertain. They go away, then they come back again. Financing is sometimes difficult, and it's difficult to use the promise of future incentives to secure your loan at the bank. Utility interconnections can be costly and difficult, but there is increased interest, and we think that utilities are starting to move in that direction. Next slide, please. Some of this Andy has already gone through, the toolkits. I just want to direct your attention to a few different ones, different partners that you're not normally used to dealing with. Links to technical resources I added in addition to the AFDC and NGVA. The American Biogas Council is another possibility that you might want to talk to. And USDA has funding available under grants. Also, a lot of the states have funding. There's some innovative financing out there. Third parties would include things like RIN managers if you're interested in trying to secure funding under the Renewable Fuel Standard. A lot of technical assistance that is possible, and we talk about that much more in the paper. Next slide, please. Again, different connections that you're not normally involved with are the municipal solid waste, resource recovery authorities, composting facility operators, and advocates for composting to assure them that we're not talking about taking away those soil amendments. We're talking about creating energy as well as soil amendments. And then there's a number of other things that are discussed in the paper, and I urge you to look at the paper and look at some of the ideas, and I'd like to hear some of your ideas as well. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Callie Johnson with NREL, and I'm here to talk to you about E85. And so E85 is one of our most robust markets and kind of the most consistently growing markets throughout the long term. And I do have some slides. All right. So it's one of the most consistent growth markets throughout the long term in terms of vehicles and stations. We have some major changes coming up in the next 5 years. And so, well, just to talk about some of the major changes, they're changing the way that CAFE credits. Thank you. Yeah, so they're changing the way that CAFE credits FFV production. They're switching it from an assumption that, hey, I'm a bit off of the format here. So I will switch back to the format and get to the major changes in their appropriate slides. So what Clean Cities has been up to in E85, we produced the ethanol handbook, which is a very heavily used guide for the retailers. It's one of the most downloaded documents off of the AFDC. Of course, we do the AFDC station locator to help people with FFVs find the E85. DOE has done equipment testing and listing for codes and standards, including fire codes and UL, helping UL come up with their standards. So what have the coalitions been up to? Just a couple of projects I'd like to highlight. Chicago has an innovative project where they require the use of E85 in FFVs owned by the city. And so as an example of the Clean Cities program's productivity, we've done case studies and kind of are aiding Chicago, helping the other coalitions know more about what they did and to kind of spread that idea. So hopefully that could be replicated. And several coalitions have teamed up to create the I-65 ethanol refueling corridor. That's what the map over there is. And so they can, so someone can drive, 866 miles without going below a half a tank of E85. There are that many stations. And then, of course, there are many E85 outreach events and literature distributions, which I'll discuss the importance of those in an upcoming slide. So next slide, please. So the state of the market for E85. There's a lot of vehicles out there, almost 16.5 million vehicles. They're predominantly light duty, and they have many models. In 2014, there were 90 models to choose from. Stations, there are nearly 3,000 stations across 47 states, and they're pretty well-located stations. They serve mainly the general public as the consumer, as opposed to being fleet-specific, like many of our other fuels. They're driven largely by broad policies. One of them is CAFE incentives for the OEMs to produce the vehicles, and this is what I was discussing. There's a major change coming up. By 2020, essentially, the OEMs have to prove that their flex fuel vehicles are using E85 in order to get the CAFE credits. That's kind of integral in the calculation of their credits. So the OEMs have a vested interest in figuring out and promoting E85 use in FFVs. So I feel like there could be a big role in clean cities in that role. So the EPACT fleet requirements, the federal fleet and state and alternative fuel providers are required to purchase FFVs and now use E85. And then the renewable fuel standard, which is in flux, but it is requiring an increasing amount of ethanol to come onto the market, and that's traditionally been absorbed by E10. Now we've hit the E10 blend wall, and so that's another potential big change coming up in the next 5 years, is that E85 is one of the candidate fuels that could help the renewable fuel standard move beyond E10. Next slide, please. And just an overall map of where the flex fuel vehicles are and where the E85 stations are. The general take-home picture, they're big in the Midwest, and they do seem to be matched up pretty well. Next slide. So, overview of the retail market, over 150,000 gasoline stations are in the U.S., and less than 3,000 of them offer E85, so that's about 2%. And the average fuel station dispenses 17,500 gallons of fuel per month for fueling position. That's gasoline. And this is data from the National Association of Convenience Stores. And the average E85 refueling position dispenses 435 gallons per month. So these refueling positions and the dispensers are very underutilized. And so that points out one potential strategy is just getting these FFVs. There's lots of FFVs. There's quite a bit of capacity of the refueling stations. We just need to get the vehicles and the stations together. So how do we do that? Next slide, please. So some ways to do that are to educate drivers on FFV technology that they already have. I know that Clean Cities has been doing this, but we need to continue to make sure that people that have FFVs know that they can use FFVs and know that know the advantages of using E85 in their FFVs. We need to educate drivers on the availability of E85, so they know that they have stations nearby. We need to inform the debate about ethanol sustainability. We lost the green crowd for the most part a few years ago, and there's a lot of data showing that ethanol is much more sustainable than gasoline, and we need to get that message out. We're doing that some on the AFDC, just informing the debate. We're, not having to be strong salesmen by any means, but just say, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Here's the data. It looks like ethanol is quite sustainable, and furthermore, as we move on to cellulosic ethanol, that's going to be way more sustainable. It's good to keep that in mind and let people know that that we're laying the groundwork for next generation biofuels here that are going to be even more sustainable. And then more stations, and it is still important to increase the stations so that more drivers have easy access. And so we did a literature search with Paul Levy of Oak Ridge, and kind of came to a conclusion that the inconvenience cost of an alternative fuel. When you're using an alternative fuel that there aren't very many stations, you can put a cost on inconvenience, and And then that drops as you reach like 20% of all the gasoline stations. And so that's a good number to keep in mind. Next slide, please. The National Clean Cities, so the overarching clean city strategies. So at the national program, we need to facilitate FFE owners to refuel with E85, document E85 success stories so that they can be replicated. Training designed for retail fuel marketers, that includes the direct source opportunities, could allow pricing flexibility. Right now, it seems like the jobbers that retailers are getting their fuel from aren't allowing, basically the fuel price isn't following the price of corn or the source fuel at all, of ethanol. And so it seems like there could be opportunities to explore with retailers getting their E85 more directly from the source where prices aren't as pegged to the price of gasoline. And we also need to do training for equipment and facility needs. Key partnerships, the retail fuel marketers, such as the National Association of Convenience Stores. We have a good relationship with them. We need to make more inroads with Sigma, consumer groups like AAA. They kind of entered the debate on E15, and so it's good to get close with them and make sure that we're more in agreement on E85, and then regulated fleets are another good key partnership. For local coalitions, we need more local initiatives to increase driver awareness, just on the ground, getting more drivers to know that they can and should use E85. And to work with more innovative fleets on refueling behavior. We've set up a lot of programs where innovative fleets, such as Chicago, are using innovations to affect their fleet drivers and get them to use E85 more. Next slide, please. So what vehicles are using FFEs? It's light-duty vehicles and an abnormal number of patrol cars. So this is data from the 2013 annual metrics report. And next slide. So what niches? Most of them are the general market, quite a bit in the local government and state government. Next slide. So conclusions, enough FFEs are on the road to potentially use a large quantity of E85. Many E85 stations are underutilized. Getting existing FFEs to use existing E85 stations is the key. We're already doing quite a bit on that, and there's quite a bit more we can be doing. And the most common FFEs are light-duty vehicles in the general population, state governments, and local governments. All right, thank you.
All right. So now Wendy Defoe for biodiesel can come up on the slides. So I've been fighting a cold, so forgive me if I have to pop a cough drop in my throat or in my mouth or take a couple sips of water here. So Teresa Alleman at NREL is not here today, but she helped us develop this presentation, so I want to thank her, even though she's not here. Can we go to the first slide, please? So I think across all of the fuels that we'll talk about today, I think these first slides that talk about activities in clean cities really demonstrate that the program is playing to its strengths. Coalitions are doing what they're good at. The national program is doing what they're good at. Thank goodness, huh? So the national program produces a biodiesel handling and use guidelines, much like the ethanol handbook that we have, is really one of the most downloaded documents on the web. The national program has also supported some fuel quality testing. A lot of that has been done at NREL. And B20 locations, we do a lot of data gathering, whether that's station locations, laws and incentives, related to fuel, related to production. Those are the things that the national program has done. Really, it plays to our strengths. Coalitions, doing in biodiesel exactly what plays to their strengths. Working with fleets, getting them to adopt the fuel, using an example from one fleet to take to another, which we continue to hear is very important. I think a unique thing about biodiesel is really the Fenton, Missouri example, that It's very unique about biodiesel that you can take that into a school, and students at a school can learn to produce their own biodiesel, and it can be used in the school district. Next slide, please. So the current state of the market for biodiesel, there's 13 million diesel vehicles on the road. I was surprised when we looked at the polk data that those vehicles are about equally divided between class 3 and below and class 4 to 8. That really surprised me. I think I made George look it up about 3 or 4 times before I really believed him. The light duty segment is growing significantly. In 2012, there were 17 diesel models. In 2015, where we are now, there's 35. So that offers huge potential for biodiesel on the light duty side of the US fleet. Stations, when we talk about B20, we say there's 775. I think it's very important to remember with biodiesel that the AFDC and Clean Cities really tracks blends at B20 and above, but there's a significant amount of biodiesel use in the country at levels of B2 and B5. So, but all we track is B20 and above. The number of stations has grown over the last 3 years. There's a chart, I think, in the strategy paper that shows that trend over the last couple of years. Niches that we see biodiesel used in right now, government and utility fleets. I know I was at a meeting on Monday, and Claude Masters from Florida Power and Light, who I think is here, was talking about that he uses biodiesel. Lots of utility fleets use biodiesel in part of the suite of fuels that they use. Private fleets, of course, like essential baking, agricultural applications, and no surprise, school buses are a great application for biodiesel. Next slide, please. So this is from the Clean Cities data that the coordinators report every year. You probably can't see the bottom. Biodiesel is red, as you can see on your right. Lots of use in delivery, lots of use in the unknown category, which Callie can explain to us sometime. And no surprise, lots of use in semi-truck, which is class 7 and 8, and school bus over on the end. Next slide, please. So this sort of talks about the niche markets where we think there's potential for biodiesel. That's hard to say. There's how many millions of vehicles out there. Every single one of those diesel vehicles is a potential biodiesel user, and it's a very easy transition. As we talked about biodiesel at the lab, we just kept talking about what the low barriers to entry are for biodiesel, and that you can start at different blend levels. If you have a large fleet with a lot of diesel vehicles, biodiesel is one solution at one time for an entire fleet. And again, that's very unique to biodiesel. The school bus market, which we actually talk about with a lot of fuels, has big potential, 675,000 buses. Work trucks, thanks to NTEA for helping me with some of this data. The figures on the right side, in class 4, 27% of the vehicles are diesel, 5, 6 is 75, and again, no surprise, 7, 8, 95% of the vehicles in that class are diesel, so that has huge potential. In the strategy paper, we talk about ports. For the purposes of this presentation, we just put drayage vehicles in with work truck vehicles. I was surprised to learn after asking quite a number of sources that there really isn't a definitive source for the number of drayage vehicles in the country. The Port of San Pedro, I think it is one of the largest container complexes in the country, and that port alone has 14,000 vehicles in it. And no, as is well known, port vehicles are usually, or drayage vehicles are usually older vehicles. So again, a big opportunity for biodiesel to be used in ports, and you're not doing anything new with infrastructure. And that's a big advantage for ports. Next slide, please. So school bus in this market, some of this was on the slide before. As I said, a huge opportunity for biodiesel is the low cost for fleets to implement, and you can start with the lower blend, you can move to a higher blend. It's an easy solution for school districts that want to make it part of the sustainability work that they're doing. Next slide, please. Ports, we sort of talked about this. I think the other thing significant here is that so many of the port vehicles are individually owned, and it's an easy transition if you have, if it's your own truck. It's just a fuel that you're buying at the port. So again, that low barrier to entry for biodiesel is very significant. Next slide. work truck market. We have, over the last few years, developed a really good partnership with NTEA, Doyle Summerall. I know you're in the audience somewhere. And Doyle's staff has really helped us understand the work truck market more, how to enter that market, how to talk with people in the work truck industry. Next slide, please. But we think that, again, that work truck market is just, huge. And as I said before, biodiesel is a great solution for a fleet that has diesel vehicles across a number of classes. Overarching clean city strategies, training designed for fleet operators about switching to B20. I know there was talk at this year's MBB conference about doing a retailer program for BQ 9000. And we just hear again and again that when you're a fleet manager adopting a new alternative fuel, what you want to know is who else is doing it. Who else is doing what I have done, and can I talk to them, and can you tell me what they did, and how do I learn from that? So the national program continuing to collect those stories from coordinators and from fleets and helping them tell those stories to others is very important. Key partnerships, again, we have a great partnership with NTEA. School bus associations, there's actually, in August this year at the National Association for Pupil Transit, there's an extra day at that conference this year just focused on alternative fuels for school buses. That extra day at that conference happened because someone on the Clean City staff went to those conference people and talked to them about adding something specifically about alternative fuels. So I think those partnerships with the School Bus Association is really growing. I think we covered ports. Local coalitions, we sort of talked about that. Understand what's happening nationally, use that information locally. As I talked to coalitions a little bit when I developed this presentation, someone said to me, well, it's really important that all coordinators understand where biodiesel is available locally. And sometimes they don't necessarily know that. So that's kind of something we'll talk about with them over the next bit. Next slide, please. Conclusions. The size of the diesel fleet continues to grow. If you look at the strategy paper, NTEA made some predictions about how many more fleets are purchasing new vehicles next year. So the size of that fleet is going to continue to grow. Low cost of entry, I just can't say it enough, that is a huge advantage for biodiesel. Assuring fuel quality, NREL has done a lot of work around that. I know coordinators do work in their local community about helping fleets understand how to make sure they have ASTM spec fuel, documenting successes, and the last one, which is covered in the paper, and I really didn't cover it in the slides, but is increasing the retail presence of biodiesel in order to serve that growing number of light-duty vehicles. I think that's the last one. One more, maybe? Thank you to everyone who helped with this presentation. Stacy Noblet with ICF and Doyle Summerall in the audience, and Cliff Gladstein, if you're here, thank you for your emails yesterday. So that's it. I think Margot's with propane next.
All right, I'm on the clock. Well, you don't have to pay the introduction slide. So when Kelly and Wendy and I sat down to talk about what our strategy was going to be, to talk about entire industries that many of you have dedicated your life to in 6 minutes or less, we sort of decided that since the theme of the day is to try to elicit a response, that we were just going to throw out a bunch of wet noodles and see which one stuck to the wall. So if we have provoked you, if we have made you say that is an awesome idea or that is the worst idea in the whole world, then we have done our job. We just sort of kicked around some ideas for what we think, hey, what could clean cities do? And that's sort of what has been reflected in some of our presentations. So if that elicits a response from you, I think we have done our job and our feelings are not hurt. If you get into your breakout sessions and you say those people are crazy and those are terrible ideas and that's never going to work, that's okay. Give us what idea you think is going to work. So big overview about what we've done in propane. Really, there has been a lot of work, and I think one of the things in the propane industry that we have worked really hard in over the past few years is trying to nail down this sort of station situation. There's not a lot of consistency and standardization in stations, and every place that sells propane is not an ideal place to fill up a propane vehicle. So there has been a lot of work sort of related to the whole station pricing, costs, fueling infrastructure business lately, and I don't think we've kind of gotten there all the way yet, but we've made a lot of progress, and that's still going to show up high on our list of things that we want to continue. And I will say, as we were going through all of the case studies about what are some interesting projects to highlight, and I won't go into all of them, but I will say, in my opinion, propane does an amazing job of engaging with their niche markets. There is a lot of great work in niche markets and picking a target niche market and really entering that market with zest. There's just a lot of really good work done in the propane industry on that. Next one. Next slide. 140,000 vehicles on the road. A lot of those are sort of the medium and light duty realm. And there is a lot of thought, or sort of the target that they're shooting for is 220,000 vehicles by 2020. So that's really pretty substantial growth in a short amount of time. So there are almost 3,000 stations on the road, in the market right now. Only 50% of those are considered primary by the AFDC. And sort of what that means is that 50% of those stations are totally geared up and ready to sell for a vehicle. The other ones you can get vehicle fuel at, but maybe it's not quite as transparent as pulling your gasoline vehicle up to a gasoline station. So it just takes a little bit more effort. So we've gone in and we've categorized those, but if only 50% of those 3,000 stations are completely set up for either large-scale fleet refueling or consumer fueling in an easy way, there's a long road to hoe to try to satisfy 220,000 vehicles on the road. We're going to need to increase the number of stations to accommodate that. And some of the niches that are working well today, school bus delivery niches are working well today. Next slide. Again, we just sort of threw out a couple niches. These are the four I'll talk about: school bus, paratransit, government, and delivery. Next slide. And partly that's because this is the slide I think Callie and Wendy both had a little bit on this slide, but it sort of shows where the vehicles are. So vehicles for propane right now are light duty and light truck. So this is unknown light. The other one is unknown heavy. So the first unknown is unknown light. So there's a lot of light duty product that's running around. I'm guessing taxi cabs, work pickup trucks. School buses is pretty high for propane, and delivery trucks is pretty high for propane. Next one. So like I said, they're doing a great job. Propane as an industry is doing a really great job in getting into these markets. School bus is one of them. They have sort of set their sights on the school bus market and said, we want to be in this market. There's been a lot of R&D done to develop product. And I think they're doing a great job in here. The reason it shows up on we need to keep working on this niche is, first of all, because there's a really robust product, but also because even with all the work that they've done, only 2% of school bus fleets are currently using propane. So there's a big opportunity for propane to make further inroads into that niche. Next one. Paratransit. So similarly, I think there's some really good product for paratransit. And what's interesting about this niche is that most of these vehicles qualify for alternative fuel money from FTA. So there's a good opportunity to help cover some incremental cost in this market. And only 2% of that market uses any type of alternative fuel at all. So really across all the fuel types, there's a decent potential for that market. Next one. Delivery niche. So what I think is interesting about delivery is that there is some long, good, sustained performance and great experience in this niche, right? Some fleets have been using propane for delivery for years and years and years. So we have a good historical case studies to say this has worked. And then we have some new interest in new people purchasing these vehicles now and just trying to get into it. So there's also some new enthusiasm, and it just sort of sets it up for a really good time to sort of explore this. Again, there's good product available in it. And another interesting part of this niche is that it's just humongous and trying to be able to capture all the possible delivery combinations. But for step vans and box trucks, there is a huge market for those out there and a really broad array of fleets. And then government fleets make the list partly because they're regulated, and so they have to use alternative fuel, and propane represents a really good opportunity to sort of, for a relatively low cost or easy entry, to use propane in those fleets. The other thing that's interesting about this is, you know, a lot of these fleets operate a huge wide variety of vehicles, right? They got a few light duty products, they got some medium duty products, they might even have a bus or two, and then they tend to have like some off-road equipment, some lawn equipment, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a good little way to bring in some of the lawn mowers type of work that the propane industry has really done a lot of work on recently too. So once you can get propane into that fleet and they have fueling on site, that's a good opportunity. So again, we just sort of tried to think about what were some of the things facing the industry and what could we possibly do. And I do think, if I step back, I'm a 30,000-foot view person and not really a 2-inch view person at all. So it's very comfortable for me to stand back and say, what should we be doing with this? But if I really look at some of the information we pulled out when we were pulling this report together, I think that propane as an industry in vehicles does a really great job of attacking the niche, of understanding what that niche means. The challenges and where there's room to grow tend to reside along sort of industry coordinated types of activities. So for example, right now they are looking at a new dispenser nozzle for propane. So something like that, where how do we get the whole industry to sort of agree on what a dispenser should look like, what the user experience should be. So we hosted a workshop recently at NREL with the propane industry, and the user experience was very much the topic of conversation. And I think understanding the user experience and improving and standardizing, and I hate being a government person and saying standardizing because we sort of sound like military people, but somehow standardizing that user experience for users is really important, and making it not be scary, not be difficult to find, getting to when you pull up at a station, are you sure you're being charged the right way? Are you sure there's room to turn your vehicle around and to pull it in? Are you sure somebody's going to be at that station? Are you sure their nozzle is going to be compatible with the filler neck in your vehicle? Standardizing that experience for the user. What are the codes and standards? And they may be all written down in you know, the official codes and standards that are published, but being able to interpret them as a fleet manager in some type of way so that all the fleets can understand those and interpret them the same way, and all the station owners can understand and interpret them the same way. So really it's broader sort of industry coordination, I think, is where there's a lot of potential in this. So what some of our recommendations are things like training, familiarizing people with the technology. I think the propane vehicle and engine technology has changed and improved a lot recently, and helping educate fleets on what does that technology look like. And this is not the propane conversion of 20 years ago, that this looks really different, is going to be really important. And with the local coalitions, the number one thing I said I thought people could do would be to go to all the propane stations in the AFTC locator and understand what that user experience is for the people in your coalition and in your neighborhood. And to sort of experience how it's different at every station, and get a feel for what that industry and that user experience is like. And then engaging and trying to figure out how can we standardize that, or how can we help people who are trying to implement this technology have a successful experience at that station. Again, hopefully I provoke something. Hopefully you think an idea is so terrible you want to write, please don't ever do that. But you will get a chance to do that this afternoon. I don't think I need to cover any of that stuff. Awesome, thanks.
Running a little behind, and we need to take a break. I think everybody would agree. So if you could be back here in exactly 10 minutes, we can take up from there and hopefully make up for some lost time. Coming back at 10:40.
I'm waiting patiently.
No, go ahead.
Good job.
Tax credits and
I know. In my number, they have the rudder. We were talking about this last night.
I was talking about that.
Brian, yeah. If we had the rudder, they would have a vehicle. And because they said, because they say and I said,
she said that very thing in a meeting. Yeah, we don't pass that on. We need that ourselves. It makes things
I just want to make sure you guys were talking
yeah,
about that.
past the elevators, it's on your right.
So are they gonna just go up, right?
I think just go up.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I don't know why you
You
couldn't.
don't want people in power.
How you doing? Good.
Well, get out.
We just go out for a quick meal and just
Thanks so much.
you've been on the road a lot. Well,
All since, when did I drive down here? Sunday.
has all the snow been disrupting you, or
Oh, that's horrible. Horrible. The beauty is the roads are clear. I've been able to walk my car in 3 weeks. You can't even, if I put my turn signal on, you can't even see that I put my turn signal on. It's like this rolling dirt ball.
this is your, you know.
Yeah, that is pretty
looks
much-
like you.
That's more than is at my house right now, but since there's been no thaw,
No, that's the thing.
what I'm really frightened of is my office is not my Queen Cities office, but my Randy Renzo office is in the basement of the house. And I have these things called escape walls, and they're windows. I think it's gonna, windows are gonna come. It's an awful lot of weight.
I mean, on my first floor windows, the snow is anywhere between a half and 3/4 of the way up. We had some guys take the snow off the roof. One side of my house is buried. How you doing? Yeah, it's absolutely nuts.
I can't. I'm having so much trouble. It's like getting work done. There was 11 consecutive weeks where my children had full day of school for 4. Had like 4 snow days, like 2 delays, parent teacher conference, early dismissal.
There's always
I was
something.
like,
And my wife had a capacity. She texted, she had to shovel twice to get out of the driveway before the line.
Urgent. Urgent message. They had to go on call.
And we'd be out there.
Yeah, right. How you doing, Wendy? How's things? Good?
my first time back to Rhode Island. Oh, yeah. For 7 nights. Well, no, okay. Thursday, yeah, I have a car one night. Thursday, another night. I'm down here. Did you get in last night? No, I was here for 8 Everybody's really focused on it. So it's like my kids were in, He said my picture was wrong. I'm gonna call the other week. Okay, my picture for you too. Oh, I know. It's like 30 seconds later, my phone rings. Yeah, I'm starting to feel a lot better.
We're going to do the Queen Cities 300. We got the slab.
I would want you to. I'm heading back tonight.
Oh, I'm Ken with James Madison University. How are you? Nice to meet you. Good to meet you. And I'm ceremonial for Queen City. Great. First time we slept in the bed too. That's a long story. You got in there, jumped into the bed.
I need to go see Marco. It wasn't working. Oh, there is only one slide right now?
But they could put his up.
Okay, you know one quick thing. Once somebody touches the laptop, then he takes the control away from the slide advance. Let me see, maybe I'll take the receiver and plug it in. And maybe.
Could everybody be seated?
What are they trying to do? Are they ready? Well, we'll just give them a minute to get back in. Do we have a Colts fan that left their watch over by the security?
Are you surprised?
Maybe you could tell the folks, well, they're not going to sit up here, but can you just tell folks?
Whoops. I'm good. I would like to. Only if you're guaranteed it's not going to.
Okay, both slides. I just saw him.
I probably didn't answer.
Great station, great story, but I can't tell.
Can we get everyone seated again? Please be seated so we can get back on schedule. Thank you. I'm just going to make one quick announcement. Someone left their watch. No, you can do it. It's working now. Everything's working now. So if you could move this quickly. There is some pressure. If we could get everybody seated, it would be most appreciated. We can get things moving back in the right direction in terms of making up for some lost time. Thanks. Did anyone leave a Colts fan leave their watch at security? We have a Colts watch here. Looks like a men's watch. So see me if it's yours. We're going to get started first with Bo's presentation from Oak Ridge.
Thanks, Linda. I'm getting some pressure to speed this along, so bear with me if we move through this pretty quickly. We're trying to get back on schedule. I'm Bo Salisbury, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and I'm going to talk today about light-duty vehicle fuel economy. If our slides work. There we go. Current activities in the Clean Cities program for fuel economy. You're probably familiar with these. Since the mid-'70s, it's gone under various names, but our original product was the annual fuel economy guide, and we still put that out. You can see some statistics up here over how many we put out last year on the model year 15 guide. In 1999, we started the website fueleconomy.gov, and it has since eclipsed the guide as our most popular information product. In the Clean Cities program, we have two areas that we deal with fuel economy. One's consumer information, education, and outreach, and one is fuel economy research. And these represent our primary tools for consumer information, education, and outreach. They fulfill DOE's statutory responsibility to provide fuel economy information in collaboration with EPA. Again, you can see how the website use has grown. We had a bit of a dip in 2010 with the recession, and it's come back up to where last year we had almost 50 million user sessions, and the year before that was our highest year ever. We had 58 million user sessions. So these are our, again, these are our primary products for consumer information and education. The other side of the house is fuel economy research. We also have Clean Cities funding for this. We do quite a bit of it at ORNL. You can see listed some of the topics we've dealt with over the years. Much of the research that's done at ORNL actually has to do with fuel economy tips, driving tips, and maintenance tips that we can use in the fuel economy guide and on the website. You can see some of the topics. I won't read down through them in the interest of time. Other things that we're doing right now at ORNL, we're working on a personalized fuel economy model and tool, and I'll get more information about that in a slide coming up in a little bit. We're working with Dr. David Green at the University of Tennessee on an analysis of the accuracy of EPA fuel economy estimates versus the real world MPG data that's entered in the MyMPG tool on our website. Another research effort we have going is with UC Davis. They did a study back in, I think, 2003, and they're doing a new version of it, survey research on how consumers value fuel economy. So those are the two sides of the house in terms of what we do with the Clean Cities program. In terms of the market for light-duty vehicle fuel economy, as you can see from this graph, fuel economy in the U.S. has increased dramatically since 1975. You can see that big jump there in the late 70s. It sort of plateaued and started actually going down up until about year 2005. And since 2005, it's actually increased 25% in the U.S. This is a huge market. There's about 253 million light-duty vehicles on the road in the U.S. So this is really a prime market for us in terms of where we can target our strategies in terms of consumer information. And that's why driving and maintenance tips are so important. You can see by comparison there were only about 15 million new cars sold in 2013. We may have to go, there we go. In terms of increased fuel economy for new cars, we saw that graph of how the average fuel economy had increased since 1975. That's likely to continue for at least the next decade because in 2012, NHTSA and EPA issued their new CAFE standards, setting the target the equivalent of 54.5 mpg by 2025. And what this means is that the new standard will require model year 25 light-duty vehicles to average about 49 mpg versus the model year 14 combined standard of 34.1 for cars and 26.3 for light-duty trucks. So we see this as good news in terms of continued improvement in new vehicle fuel economy. In terms of potential markets, we're a little bit different. It's hard for us to talk about niches, so we talk about opportunities or markets. The number one area we want to look at is to continue our existing outreach and education efforts, and those again are primarily through the Fuel Economy Guide and the fueleconomy.gov website, but we want to expand them to better coordinate with other efforts that are ongoing inside Clean Cities. So we want to seek input from the coordinators on existing and new tools needed to convey fuel economy information to consumers, fleets, schools, and others. Some of the existing tools that we already have, and I won't go down the complete list, but some of them are on the AFDC website, some of them on the fueleconomy.gov website. These are some of the existing tools that we can use to work with coordinators in getting the fuel economy message out. And based on coordinator input, we would like to develop a fuel economy toolkit that could be used by coordinators when they're dealing with fleets or when they're dealing with schools or anyone else. The toolkit can include some of the existing tools we just showed on the last slide from fueleconomy.gov and the Alt Fuels Data Center, as well as some of the new tools that I'm going to talk about in a minute that are going to be developed. And we'd also like to provide the coordinators with training and information needed for these tools in the toolkit. Aside from the toolkit, which is a topic we've talked about over the years and we would like to finally bring it to fruition, another topic we've talked about is the possibility of an Ad Council public service campaign on fuel economy. We think that would reach a much larger and more diverse consumer audience than our previous efforts. Again, it's an idea that's been around for a few years, and we'd like to maybe revisit that one. Our second target market is used vehicles. The U.S. market for used vehicles is quite a bit larger than that for new vehicles. Again, in 2013, you can see there were about 15 million new vehicles sold in the U.S., and there were nearly 3 times that many used vehicles sold. The challenge for us in providing fuel economy information in terms of used vehicles is that unlike new vehicles, used vehicles aren't required to display the MPG window label as they do on new cars. And also, both used car buyers and sellers are relying on a very wide variety of information sources, from want ads in local newspapers to new and used car dealerships to online car shopping sites. So to try to target the used car market, fueleconomy.gov and the Find and Compares car tool, they're supported by an EPA fuel economy estimates, a database of EPA fuel economy estimates for all vehicles sold in the U.S. since 1984. So that's a wealth of information that's available for people who are either looking to buy or sell used cars. That came in, it proved its value in the Cash for Clunkers program a few years ago. It became the de facto site for people to come to get information about used cars that they wanted to trade in to get the benefits of that program. Fueleconomy.gov also has the used car MPG label tool, and it helps sellers advertise through either an online ad that they can download and use on their online sales advertisements, or in a window sticker that can be downloaded and printed, the original EPA fuel economy estimate for their used vehicle. So over the next few years, we propose to work with the coordinators to expand these outreach efforts towards the used vehicle market by providing that EPA fuel economy information back to 1984 and the used car MPG label. And one thing we'd really like to stress is we'd like to work with the coordinators to try to get contacts with new and used auto dealers and online car shopping sites such as eBay Cars, Autotrader.com, CarMax, to try to work out an arrangement where they would use our used car label on their sites. That's an initiative we have going, and we'd like to pursue that in the next few years. And of course, include the used car MPG label in the fuel economy toolkit. The third target market that we see for fuel economy has to do with consumer uncertainty about official MPG estimates. The problem is that the estimates are inaccurate for many individuals, even though they may be unbiased for the population as a whole. So we see this as an opportunity. There's value in developing a personalized fuel economy estimate. And we're working on a model at ORNL to support this new personalized MPG calculator. And it will produce, when it's completed, it will produce fuel economy estimates based on the driver's actual drive cycle data as measured using onboard diagnostic systems. And when we develop that model, eventually we hope to develop a tool that would be used by consumers and fleets on fueleconomy.gov to capture a more personalized fuel economy estimates for different vehicles they may be comparing. So in the near term, we want to provide coordinators with information about the data from the MyMPG database and the research that I mentioned that's going on at UT that describes how real-world fuel economy varies from EPA estimates, eventually including the personalized MPG calculator in the fuel economy toolkit. And it goes without saying, provide the coordinators with training and seek their feedback on ways to make the information and especially that calculator more useful to their consumers and their fleets. The fourth target area we see for fuel economy has to do with the way consumers are accessing fuel economy information now. They still rely on the website, but increasingly they're accessing the website using mobile devices, whether that be tablets or smartphones. So we've started reformatting fueleconomy.gov using what's known as responsive design. And it improves the website appearance and function across all platforms, but particularly for smartphones and tablets. And we'll continue to do that until we have the whole website in responsive design. We also want to develop mobile applications for our most popular sections of the website, starting with Find a Car and MyMPG. We want to provide coordinators with training and information about these tools, the mobile applications and tools, and include them in the toolkit. And we'd like to get feedback from the coordinators on the types of information and tools they would like to see in a mobile format for their fleets. The fifth target market, we've got 6, so I'm almost done. The fifth one has to do with what David Green was talking about earlier today, and that's a strategy for periods of low gasoline prices. When gasoline prices are low, it's no surprise that consumers and the media pay less attention to fuel economy and therefore to our products that we're trying to get out to inform the consumers. We'd like to work with coordinators to illustrate the benefits of both alternative fuels and fuel economy in a world of volatile oil prices. And this example comes directly from Dr. Green. He and I have talked about this. It might be possible to use historical data on oil price volatility to construct expected fuel prices over the lifetime of a vehicle, and then develop a set of illustrative future fuel price paths that would illustrate the potential for volatility, so that this would help make the argument for both alt fuels and for petroleum consumption reduction. And it could lead to new tools on the website and in the toolkit to address the issue of low gasoline prices when consumers and fleets are making vehicle purchase decisions. And finally, the last target market and strategy that we've identified for fuel economy has to do with advanced technology vehicles. We're seeing more and more hybrids, plug-in hybrids and EVs on the roads in the United States, and fuel cell vehicles are entering the market in California. Each of these vehicle types requires a different method of measuring fuel economy, and that presents a challenge in explaining that to the consumers. Also, as these technologies evolve, the effects of driver behavior and vehicle maintenance on their fuel economy will change. So we want to continue the research that we're doing at ORNL and at universities to update the driving and maintenance tips for these advanced technology vehicles. We want to provide consumers with this information about existing resources that we have for advanced technology vehicles, plus any of these new tools that we develop. And again, seek feedback from the coordinators on the types of information and tools they need for these advanced technology vehicles. That's it for me. I want to acknowledge Janet Hobson, who's here, and Dr. David Green. They're both here and are integral parts of this program, always have been, and I appreciate their help on putting this together. And that's it for me.
Hi, I'm Dan Santini, and thanks to Bo there for pointing out that there's a lot more hybrids, plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles on the road. That's a topic of my presentation, and I wanted to mention I've had the pleasure of working on electric drive for decades now, I think, and Marcy, my co-author, has had the problem of getting me out of the ivory tower and down to the point where I can be of use to you guys, so I hope I did okay on that. And I hope we get a presentation up here in a bit. Maybe it's, let's see if it's up to me. If you need a stick. The point that I start with is that we're in strategic planning. For me, it's the second 5-year phase, start of a second 5-year phase. I was involved in the first 5-year phase, and it's a chance to look back. And we took that opportunity with our paper. And what we found is that the Clean Cities strategic activities that many of you coordinators are quite familiar with, there's evidence that we got that you led to a lot of PEV success. And I use the words Clean Cities strategic activities led to PEV success. As a scientist, I might have said contributed to, but now that I'm down at this level, I just put in the font size is important. I put led to. So the next slide, we were going to skip through. Oh, here we go. Okay, we'll skip through. You're familiar with the fact that there have been plenty of illustration that Clean Cities provides a lot of tools for coordinators to work with. Next slide, please. The point that I just skipped over is that what we looked at was the PEV readiness grants. There were 16 readiness grants of about $300 million of federal investment during the ARA period, and well over 16 coalitions participated in these activities. One of the things that's been developed just recently is a summary PEV readiness guide, which is posted for the rest of you coordinators to help you out from the knowledge that was developed. And that was one of the things that we did an evaluation of. In this slide, electric drive really started with hybrids in 1999. There were 3 models for 4 years. And they were all passenger cars. You see that there was a rise in passenger cars share over that period of time, quite successful. Trucks were tried about 4 years later, but they did not succeed. So, and then the green is the average. But we're on a nice upward path. And when we look at the hybrid, in terms of the size of the vehicle by the EPA classification and the market share weighted average, what we noticed is that the hybrids had focused almost exclusively on the mid-size, and that's partly because the Prius is a mid-size vehicle and it dominated in that particular space. If we look at the plug-in electric vehicles collectively, we see it's a much richer variety of size classes. And then if we look at the plug-in hybrid in particular, we see mid-size is chopped down and there's a lot of compacts. Well, that really is the Chevrolet Volt dominating that space. And then on the battery electric vehicle side, a lot of people have the impression that battery electrics are small cars. Well, if you just took a straight average and looked at the size and didn't weight it by sales, they would come out small. But if you look at the sales pattern, because of the Tesla, a very successful large car, and much fewer mid-sizes, the battery electric vehicles that are actually selling are larger